What's up, guys? My name is Nick Spanola, and I wanted to share some under-the-radar value picks for DFS as we head into wildcard weekend. I'm all in on folks riding the Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews stacks, but I do think it's worth considering some of these Baltimore receivers as they're in a pretty favorable matchup against Tennessee. Lamar Jackson got off to a slow start in the first half of the season that I think had a sizable influence on Baltimore pass catchers and steered people away from giving him a look, even up until now. Here on this chart, we have CPOE, which is completion percentage above expected, and EPA per dropback in the first 8 weeks of the season. And essentially, up and to the right is the optimum place to be, and vice versa with the bottom left, as designated with the green and red arrows. And as you can see here with the purple arrow, where Lamar Jackson is at, Lamar wasn't too efficient in that first chunk of the season, but since week 9, Lamar has improved substantially. Even though it's a little smaller of a sample size, it's significant enough to notice it. Reasons for this may be a combination of things like a larger sample of throws or just gaining some health back that opened up his ground game. But regardless of the reasons, the important thing to know for this sake of this video is that he's been an overall better asset to this offense. As you can see here, we have leaders in DraftKings points per dropback since week 12 among quarterbacks with at least 100 passing attempts, and Lamar far and away leads the man in second with 1.15 points per dropback. Ironically, his opponent this weekend, Ryan Tannehill. This is all relevant to one of the guys that I'm intrigued with this week. That's wide receiver Marquise Hollywood-Brown. Much of his splits coincide with Lamar's bounce back around the start of the second half. Here is yards per route run in the first 11 weeks. It was at 1.44, but since week 12, it substantially increased to 2.30 with a pretty solid sample at 39 targets in that time span. As a redraft owner of Brown from this season, I'm honestly happy to concede he was a very disappointing pick, to say the least. But I do think that people still have for lack of a better word, bad taste in their mouths from that season as a whole and are still allocating a little too much blame for his poor production on himself specifically. Lamar's the engine in that Baltimore offense that makes it run. And when he's playing well, like we've seen as of recent, I'm happy riding with guys who are in his environment, not just Mark Andrews, who's obviously a great stack piece with Jackson this week. The Ravens haven't faced noteworthy competition in recent memory, but the matchup for Baltimore receivers, specifically against Tennessee, can only be a good sign. Here are the Titans' ranks against wide receivers this season among all defenses, and as you can see, Tennessee is giving up second most DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, along with the second most receptions at over 16 per game, and they allowed 22 total touchdowns over 17 games, which is good for third most in football. Even with some of these red zone opportunities, you can concede right away going to Lamar and that Baltimore backfield as a whole. I think it's well worth the investment of adding a guy like Hollywood-Brown to a Lamar and Mark Andrews stack if you've got it. And if you aren't looking to add a piece like Brown at that price, I'll even say a cheaper alternative like Miles Boykin or Ravens legend Des Bryant isn't a bad move this week, and a nice matchup with that Ravens offense on the upswing in recent months. The next guy I like this week is a good value pick, especially in GPP formats when you're looking to hit a home run and separate yourself from the pack, is Rams wide receiver Josh Reynolds in his matchup against the Seattle Seahawks. Reynolds is an incredibly affordable salary at $3,600, which is good for DraftKings wide receiver number 28 this weekend. As we all know, the narrative of his season has been how much of a liability that Seattle defense has been, and some of the key numbers back that up, even though they haven't been abysmal since Jamal Adams has returned from injury. But they're giving up over 45 DraftKings points per game to receivers, which is the fourth most in the league this season. They allow the most receptions per game to the position at over 28, and in general, as a whole, the defense allows the most total air yards per game in the NFL at 174.5 a pop. This stood out to me because, as we know, even though Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are the fantasy horses in the LA offense, Reynolds actually has the second highest share of the Rams' total air yards on the season at 22.9%, just shy of Robert Woods, who leads with 23.9% of the team's air yards this season. So not only is the combination between the liabilities on the Seahawks defense and the impacts Reynolds brings to the Rams offense a good matchup in theory, Reynolds has literally proven he can put up these numbers given those variables just from the season alone. Here we have Reynolds' splits from his 2 games against Seattle in weeks 10 and 16, along with the other 14 games from the 2020 regular season. And in his 14 games against other opponents, he averaged only a little over 4 targets a game in that sample with a 1.10 yards per route run. But in just 2 games facing the Seahawks, he was targeted 19 times, while nearly doubling his yards per route run at 2.12. I know there's a lot of uncertainty at the quarterback position this week with Jared Goff's injury, but I still like this Reynolds play regardless who's under center because the cost is not detrimental to a DFS lineup construction. If you're looking for an edge from the other guys in that salary range, I believe Reynolds has a fantastic opportunity to impose himself on that Seahawks defense, which is something he's already proven to be capable of doing in general from the prior matchups this season. So yeah, guys, those are two players with enticing matchups this weekend and options for DFS that I want to share with you, especially if you're considering going all in this week. But remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content thus far, and good luck to you and your teams this weekend.